This podcast is brought to you by Balancing Act. Teach, coach, mentor, inspire. A collection of candid observations on the challenges facing business leaders today. Balancing Act is authored by Dr. Andrew Temte and is available today on Amazon and other fine bookstores. We sat down with musician, illustrator, and podcaster Brett Newski. We chatted about music, mental health, and his new book, It's Hard to Be a Person. We also chatted about his Dirt from the Road podcast, where you can hear stories from fellow musicians about touring and living the musician life. You can find more conversations, food reviews, live music, and events on our website, lacrosselocal.com. I'm Amy.
And I'm Brett.
And this is Lacrosse Local.
Wish I could get psyched to go out at night, see my former friends, watch them all pretend that they
I was born in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and, very basketball, sports-minded kind of family, and my dad was always a rock and roll fan, but no one in the fam was ever like a musician or even like really ever thought about playing an instrument. So when I got a guitar and got a job at McDonald's to buy the guitar, it was it was a new thing for the fam. And I think my pops was like a little bummed I loved the guitar more than basketball, but now I think he's all about the electric guitar,
Well, something that I've been, just noticed over the last couple of days, checking in on your music, the new book, which we'll talk about, but also the podcast, which I've been digging, is just your honesty about mental health. It seems like it's a through line to everything you've been doing. Has that always been the case?
Yeah, I think whether I knew it or not, I mean, that was always one of the main avenues for songwriting, was like the catharsis, the venting of, anxieties and that kind of thing. But I mean, I didn't really even know what anxiety was or generalized anxiety disorder until, I think my mid to late 20s, when I actually got diagnosed by an ENT because I was having this absurd crippling acid reflux. And I had been to all these different doctors, and I couldn't sing, my voice would get tired out and sore, and all these 7 or 8 different doctors just told me to triple my medication for protein pump inhibitors, like acid reflux medicine. And then when I went to the ENT on the 8th doctor, he's like, "Man, your anxiety is killing you." I'm like, "What? I don't even know what anxiety is." What is that? He's like, "You're worrying, you're obsessing about your voice and having these almost mini panics or low level anxiety all the time, that you're having this acid reflux trigger." And then so he started treating my anxiety and gave me a low dose of, I think it was citalopram, and right away all my acid reflux went away. And that was a big holy shit moment of wow, this is a thing that's real. I have this, and I feel less insane. So now all of a sudden there's this name for that weird underwater feeling or loss of control of your own brain kind of thing. So that was a big one. And that kind of gave me a launch point to actually start working on it, and I'm still working on it.
Just on the podcast, and we'll come back to it, but just it's interesting to hear when you're talking to your guests. I listened to Charlie Barron's and also I believe Adam from Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. It automatically makes them open up to you. Is that kind of the point? 'Cause some of these people you haven't met before.
Thanks for saying that, Brent. Yeah, I mean, some guests, I connect more on a heart level than others, but I think it's always the mission to kind of you never want it to be an interview, at least for me on the Dirt from the Road podcast. It should be like a hangout. And I think it took me, some episodes to get better at making the guest comfortable. I think if you listen to the really early ones, I'm maybe a little more anxious and just kind of trying to figure it out and find my voice kind of thing. But I mean, it's a different era of quote unquote journalism. I mean, I'm sure you remember in the 90s and before, the CNN exclusive breakthrough interview, where like sometimes the journalist would be like interviewing like some big celebrity, like I don't know, Carl Lewis on steroid scandal or Quentin Tarantino, but the journalist would like intentionally be just an asshole to try to like dig up dirt and like stir up controversy. Cause I don't know, because it was like Blockbuster Entertainment or something, and I don't know, that never made any sense to me. Or music journalism in the 70s or 80s or 90s, just like trashing the band to get more like reviews or get more buzz out about your press that you're doing. So I don't think that's really effective. I think it's just kind of corn syrup. And yeah, I think the goal is to, have the guests maybe talk about some things they've maybe never talked about on air before. And that's kind of one of the missions of Dirt from the Road.
So speaking of kind of, letting down walls, I think you do with your guests, you now have this book, which is It's Hard to Be a Person. I guess the tagline is Defeating Anxiety, Surviving the World, and Having More Fun.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's just a great title. How did the book come about?
The book came about because I think I was like just doing some doodling, and humor is always kind of like the main catharsis I go to when like heavy stuff comes at me, almost to a fault sometimes. Like sometimes I just need to be more serious about certain topics, but I think I was drawing and making fun of my own anxieties in the drawings, and then my person Anna was like, "Those are pretty good. You should post a couple and see like how people respond." And then people like started to really dig them. So yeah, I just kept making them. And after like 3 years, I had just like a shitload of them. And I was like, I gotta try to organize my scatterbrain and get this into a book. So yeah, it's finally happening.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what do you hope the viewer or reader gets out of it?
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, just like feeling better in your brain, even for an hour or a couple hours. It's there's some silly stuff in there, but there's some also like utilitarian, like anxiety, depression tackling tactics that, I mean, I've used over the years. I mean, even something as simple as like when I was feeling really anxious, I would just start to take a baseball, and anytime I drove, I would just grind the baseball on the back of my back like a DIY massage, and like that would always loosen me up, and like, or different kinds of stretches or whatever, or I think there's like 140 pages of things in there. So it's just basically stuff I've used over the years to kind of like work on myself on like a more longer lasting level, but also like little quick fixes to like anxiousness too, if that makes sense.
So the book is being published by Ramshackle Press, based out of Roca, Wisconsin. Just listening to your podcast the last couple of days, I've heard a lot of praise for the area, and us being out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. What's the connection to this area and the Driftless?
Yeah, I mean, the Driftless, I think I originally went up there for a gig at Driftless Books, the old Eddie's shop, the giant tobacco factory that's now one of the coolest bookstores in the world. So we kind of gradually became pals, and I feel like I saw him every time I went up there, and we hung out a little bit and drank some coffee, and then we just got like tighter and tighter. And he's an ideas guy, so we would always just like sit on the porch of the bookshop and just bullshit and like riff about cool arts projects, like mostly just hypothetical things. Like, what if we did this? What if we built this studio? What if we what if we did a tour of American diners and all the shows started at 10 a.m. and you got free eggs when you did, or whatever it is. And so yeah, and then he started doing like little pressings of books on the side, and I was just finishing this at the time he told me about it, so it just made sense to kind of do a collaboration with them.
It all has the kind of the one voice, the music, the podcast, the book. They all work collaboratively together. What led to the podcast? Was that COVID inspired in some ways, that everyone's home and are able to talk, or what led to the beginning of that? It's only been basically published for the last 4 months.
The podcast is coming up on a year, actually, next month. Yeah, or next week even. So, yeah, Dirt from the Road started last May. And yeah, I mean, it was just a total experiment in COVID. Spatola, my drummer, and I would get together and we would bullshit, just kind of do some trial runs. I would call my buddy Joel Havea in Hamburg, Germany, and we would do some just kind of trial podcasts and just kind of feel it out. And after doing 7 or 8 or 9 of those, I like started to kind of formulate ideas. I was like, oh, we have all these absurd road stories from touring in Germany or Czech Republic or Australia, when we got mugged or robbed, or the speaker exploded, or the sound guy fell asleep, or whatever, or we got blackmailed in Germany. I was like, we got to start recording this on audio, because otherwise we're going to forget and it's just going to get lost in the ether. So that was kind of the start. And then as it gained steam, like, we started to get more high-profile guests, and it kind of became a very legitimate podcast relatively quickly. So, and then it gave me a great excuse to talk to a lot of my musical heroes, So we've had, like, Frank Turner was on there, or Stephen Page from Bare Naked Ladies was on there, and Nada Surf. Do you know Nada Surf? One of my favorite bands. They're coming on soon. So, yeah, and then it's mostly a free form situation, but that the anchor is kind of the guest always tells one or two of their just weirdest road stories.
So coming out of the pandemic here, what's next for you? What are you excited about in 2021 or even 2022?
Great question, Brent. I mean, I'm honestly a little nervous to come out of creative bunker hibernation mode. I think that's been a real mental boost just to kind of be creative. I feel like you hear musicians all the time say stuff like, oh, I don't want to do any admin. I just want to write songs and have other people do it for me. And then I'm like, yeah, as much as I've loved the business side of music, that setup is starting to be very appealing to just like want to create all the time and make songs and podcasts in your house. But no, nonetheless, I mean, I love playing live shows and I love playing gigs. I think it's just a matter of coming back strong without coming back too strong and taking on more than I can chew, and just like being on the move so much to the point where your body and mind kind of get worn down. So yeah, the sweet spot is what we're looking for here.
Yeah, we actually started this podcast about a year ago. It's interesting to talk to artists about how they've used this time as a creative outlet. So it's almost been beneficial to them. I know it's been devastating as well, but it's also interesting to hear what's come out of this pause for everybody.
Totally. Do you ever feel like there's like too much content in the world, like post-pandemic? Do you think it's just going to be like overwhelming, or is that just an absurd thing to think about because creativity is ultimately good?
Recently listening to your podcast with, I believe, Charlie Behrens, everyone has their audience, so it's kind of, I think you guys talked about that, where it's like you don't necessarily have to reach this wide audience. There's all these different niches. Starting stuff like this, it's interesting to hear, and also just kind of like talking about these small communities, which I think you reference, Viroqua, Wisconsin. Everyone has their little niche, and it's okay wherever you're at, wherever that, if people find it interesting or find it something like they like to follow.
That is really a great perspective on that. It's like, I think a lot of people who create things are like, oh, we need to be reaching more people or playing to more people or playing to bigger audiences. And I think that's the most calming thing you can think about, is just like, find your people, and that's all that really matters. As long as you got the group, whether it's big or small, it gives you a reason to create,
Yeah, I think Mark Maron, the comedian, said yeah, I'm not for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I like Mark Maron.
So if people want to find the book, I believe it's coming out June 22nd. People can pick it up. What's the best avenue for them to follow along on yourself and the book and everything else going on?
Definitely through the website. It's just brettnewski.com, BRETTNEWSKI.com, Polish. It's going to be up on all the pre-orders and the Barnes & Nobles and Amazons eventually, but right now we're just kind of pushing it through the website because the overlords of corporate America take like 39% or something pretty wild. So, yeah, scoop it up, or, no pressure to do so, obviously, but it's there. I hope it's useful to people.
Lacrosse Local Podcast is a production of River Travel Media. Do you have an interview idea you'd like to share with us? Message us on Facebook at Lacrosse Local. Find out more about us at lacrosselocal.com, and you can subscribe to the Lacrosse Local Podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you like us, rate us 5 stars. We appreciate it.